about 15 people with us on the trip, and I'm excited that you're all here so that we can share the pilgrimage with you. Please feel free to stop me at any point and ask questions as we're going through the show. And we have kind of a cool surprise at the end. So when most people think of Greece, they think of the beaches, the first Olympics, maybe ancient philosophy, and maybe even Mamma Mia. Some might even think of Greek churches. But for us, we think of a land and culture that helped shape and form our faith over thousands of years. A land full of miracles and wonders. A place where pious people live their Orthodox Christianity to the fullest. But these things didn't happen easily. The church in Greece flourished only after years of persecution and martyrdom. Orthodoxy has been under persecution for most of its 2,000-year existence. But it is during persecution that the faith flourishes. The greatest and the waters the soil of the church with the blood of the martyrs, allowing the church of Christ to blossom into the bright, shining light we all know and love. But now, let's focus on the beautiful fruits that the church has produced in beautiful Greece. Historical, geographical, and spiritual, but nothing so sweet as when the three meet together. So first we'll talk about our journey getting there. Part of the blessing received from making a pilgrimage is the difficulty in getting there. The expenses, the inconveniences, the exhaustion is all transformed to joy and blessings at the end. Without the suffering, there would not be as much joy. Trust me, these are the cute pictures. You don't want to see the pictures of me after 27 hours of travel. Day one, arrival. Our group was joined by my mom and aunt and two ladies from Lebanon, the mother of Father Jacques Khalil and her friend, who had recently beat cancer and promised to do a pilgrimage to Greece to visit the holy sites and saints in thanksgiving for her recovery. Since we all arrived at different times, we met at the hotel, and our first activity was dinner together with Greek food and a show with traditional Greek music and dancing. Most of those in attendance were tourists, so after many traditional songs and dances, the band played some American favorites, including music from Mamma Mia, which takes place in Greece. The dancers ended the evening by smashing plates on the stage. It was time to go back to the hotel and get some rest before our very full schedule. Our first full day, which was day 2, Athens. So we began the day with the most amazing continental breakfast and this view of Athens from the top floor of our hotel. We visited many churches in Athens on the first day, beginning with the church of St. John the Baptist. And this is some pictures of St. John the Baptist. I also in Athens got to go clothes shopping in person, which is very rare. Besides the Church of St. John the Hunter being a beautiful church, I was surprised to see the relics of a saint from not too long ago, St. Nicholas Planas. I venerated his skull, which was kept in the altar, and we were all able to venerate his body, which was in the name of the church, which we saw was very common in Greece, to have the entire body of a saint on display. The holy saint, Papa Nicholas Planas of Athens, born in 1851, died in 1932, was officially glorified as a saint in 1992. His feast day is celebrated on March 2nd. Papa Nicholas, that's what they call a priest, by the way, Papa, or something like that, Papa Nicholas was married and the father of one child, but he was married at 17 and his wife died only a few years later, and so he spent the rest of his life in celibacy, his only aspiration being to serve the church. His focus for over 50 years was to serve the Divine Liturgy daily, vigils and other services. He never missed the liturgy and spent most of the time in the very small church of St. John the Hunter in Athens, Greece. That's the parish that we were at. The parish initially contained only 8 families. He never refused to commemorate and pray for anyone when he served, and he carried in his pocket slips of paper containing thousands of names whom he would pray for during the proscomedia at liturgy. Numerous stories are told of his being lifted in prayer and of the acolytes seeing him raised off the ground in front of the altar during the liturgy, where he would begin liturgy at 8 in the morning, and he would typically not finish until 2 or 3 in the afternoon. So there's no more complaining about my liturgy. Who knows, maybe I'm secretly a saint. I'm just kidding. He was famously absent-minded and was also known for giving to the poor anything that anyone might give him. There are actually icons of him. The kalimavki, that's a black hat you see that I wear during liturgy that you see him wearing in the icon. There's some icons of him wearing an oversized one because he would always leave his hat somewhere and then he would just pick up another one somewhere else, so they often didn't fit him the right way. He was not an educated man, but was considered immensely enlightened, an example of great holiness and humility. He reposed in February of 1932. And the church that we went to was the New St. John Church, which contains his relics. Outside of the church, what's amazing is that the altar of the old church still exists, with a monument of him right next to the old church where he had celebrated the liturgy daily. One thing you may be able to notice, which you'll see quite a bit of, is the scratched out faces of Christ and the saints on the icons. You see that? So you kind of see a close-up there. It's not always clear if this was done by the Muslim Ottoman Turks or in later times by the atheist communists. When we asked later on at one of the monasteries why they didn't restore the faces, the nun said for 2 reasons. 1, these are historic paintings and the national law makes it very difficult to alter the artwork in any way. 2, most importantly, we must never forget the persecution that the church endured. These serve as a constant reminder to us. So remember, the living in an Orthodox country such as Greece didn't come easily. It came after a lot of martyrdom. After some more churches, we stopped at the Greek Olympic Stadium. This stadium was originally built in the 6th century BC. It had a capacity of about 50,000 seats. After the rise of Christianity, it was not used and was mostly abandoned. It was excavated in 1869 and hosted the first modern Olympic Games, opening and closing ceremonies, and some games in 1896, and hosted 4 of the 9 sporting events that year. The 2004 Olympic Games were partly held in this stadium as well. The stadium is built entirely of marble. Speaking of marble, not only are the stadiums and churches adorned in marble, but many of the streets in Greece are also made of marble. It's actually quite amazing. And they're not just slabs that were thrown anywhere. They were artistically placed. It's like the entire country is just one big piece of art. We went to another beautiful church where the relics of Saint Philothée of Athens and Saint Gregory V, the martyr patriarch of Constantinople, were present for veneration. Saint Philothée, which means friend of God, was a saint in the 16th century. She was born to a very wealthy family and was forced into marriage by them at the age of 14. Her husband died 3 years later, and her parents wanted her to remarry, but she spent most of her time in prayer at home. and used her family's money to do charitable work. When her parents died, she became a monastic and established a monastery. She was most notable for her works of charity, but built hospices, homes for the elderly, and schools for the girls and boys of Athens. One of her more controversial activities was to buy the freedom of Greeks taken as slaves by the Ottoman Turks, especially women taken to the harems. She offered shelter to the young women, some pregnant. Despite being hunted by the Turks, she helped them escape secretly to Zia, Andros, Aegina, and Salamina, where they were safe. One of the neat things we also did was to go to St. Philothe's home in Athens, which still exists. And it was a very large mansion from the 16th century. So we got to go in that building and tour it. It was pretty neat. We visited a number of other ancient churches in town, but one of the most notable being the Church of the Holy Unmercenary Healers, which is the metochion of the Holy Sepulchre to the Church of Greece. So what that means is the Church of Jerusalem has a representative church in Greece. So it's kind of like having the Jerusalem Patriarchate's embassy in Greece, and this is what that church was. So there was like this long outdoor hallway where you'd see, like right over here, pictures from the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem. And then inside the church, they had still on the altar table, I don't know if you can really see it there, the altar cover was that of the resurrection. So often when visiting a church, I would chant the Troparion of the saint or of the feast in honor of them in their church. I also lit candles for all of the parishioners of our cathedral, as well as prayed for all of the departed from our church in every holy place that we went to. So here we stood and we chanted Christos Anesti, mostly all together, which was a beautiful experience. We then visited the famous and ancient Acropolis and Parthenon. It was a very hot day, and we had to walk up many stairs, but we finally made it to the top of the hill, although some people elected to stay in the bus. Nobody from our church. The name Acropolis means roughly the highest point of the city. So the Acropolis refers to the citadel at the top of the hill. So everything that's up there is considered the Acropolis. This building right here that we usually think of when we think of the Acropolis is actually known as the Parthenon. This ancient temple was built in the 5th century BC and was dedicated to the Greek goddess Athena, who was the Greek goddess of war. Many other ancient temples existed on the Acropolis, but this was the most well known. We then visited the famous, From the Acropolis we can see the rock where the Apostle Paul stood and preached in Athens. This rock is called the Areopagus. I want to read a passage from Acts 17. So just so you see here, this is the rock where St. Paul stood and preached, and this is an icon of him preaching there. And you notice the Acropolis, or the Parthenon, is in the background. So now, having seen that, and imagine we were standing there looking at it, standing in a place, we think our country is less than 300 years old, and we're standing in a place where St. Paul stood about 2,000 years ago, which was built about 7,000 years ago, right? So now, as you're thinking about St. Paul literally standing right here with this Parthenon behind him, listen to Acts 17, verses 16 to 34. Now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he argued in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who chanced to be there. Some also of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers met with him. And some said, "What would this babbler say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities, because he preached Jesus and the resurrection. And they took hold of him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is which you present." By the way, the Areopagus, that rock, that's where the council would have met. Kind of, you know how the Sanhedrin, the Jews had the Sanhedrin? Well, this is like the Greek government had the they would meet at the Areopagus. And so they were kind of interrogating him. "May we know what this new teaching is which you present, for you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all of the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. So Paul, standing in the middle of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To an unknown God.' What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in shrines made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all men life and breath and everything. And he made from one every nation of men to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their habitation, that they should seek God, in the hope that they might feel after him and find him. Yet he is not far from each one of us, for in him we live and move and have our being. As even some of your poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the deity is like gold or silver or stone, a representation by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all men everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all men by raising him from the dead. Now when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked, but others said, "We will hear you again about this." So Paul went out from among them, but some men joined him and believed. Among them Dionysius the Areopagite, and a woman named Damaris, and others with them. So St. Paul was preaching here with the temples to the false gods as a backdrop for the people of Athens. He was preaching about the one true God. By the way, St. Dionysius the Areopagite is the patron saint of Athens, and he's a major saint and theologian in the Orthodox Church. On the way back down from the Acropolis, we stopped at a small and ancient church dedicated to St. George. Look at the ancient iconography painted in the altar. You can notice on the icon of the Theotokos on the right that the icon not only had its face scratched out, but there were many bullet holes. This was most likely done by the Ottoman Turks. So you notice this idea of painting icons in the altar is very ancient. Look how old these icons are, right? So later that evening, they were going to have an all-night vigil in that tiny church beginning at 10 p.m. Of course, we couldn't stay for that. I would have loved to. But we went, had dinner, and got back to the hotel so we can wake up early in the morning for day 3, our journey to Nafplio, where we stopped at the ancient city of Corinth. So on our way to the next hotel in the beautiful city of Nafplio, we stopped in ancient Corinth. St. Paul not only wrote 2 letters to the Corinthians, but went there himself and preached to the people of Corinth. Corinth was an ancient Roman province, and most of the ruins have not even been unearthed yet. But much of what has been discovered are ancient temples to false gods. On the way to Corinth, we made a pit stop at the Corinth Canal. The Corinth Canal is an artificial canal in Greece that connects the Gulf of Corinth to the Ionian Sea with the Saronic Gulf and the Aegean Sea. It separates the Peloponnese from the Greek mainland. It's about 4 miles in length and only about 80 feet wide at sea level, making it impassable for many modern ships. It was originally built in the 1st century AD, but it was rediscovered in 1881 and completed in 1893. And believe me, and the people who were there can attest to this, the pictures do not do this justice. It was, just the color of the water was unbelievable. So there was a museum in Corinth with ancient sculptures and mosaics that were discovered in the area. So the mosaics, I think, were just so impressive. I think much better than anything we see today as far as mosaics go. And there were so many ancient statues that we got to look at. There, we also saw ancient Byzantine carvings that came from a church that once stood in Corinth. So you see the cross and the peacocks there. And then, my favorite part of Corinth was seeing where the Apostle Paul stood and preached to the Corinthians, and here I am, standing where Paul stood, pretending to preach. Next, we went to lunch and visited a truly wondrous place in a place called Vasta. We went to an outdoor restaurant completely powered by water energy. To say that it was beautiful would be a huge understatement. It was out in the middle of nowhere, and they also had an aviary with many kinds of birds and other livestock. I think we ate some of the livestock for lunch. We wondered why it took a while for them to prepare lunch. After lunch, we visited the Church of St. Theodora. The church is an architectural and botanical miracle. There are 17 trees, one for each year of St. Theodora's life, that grow and stand on the roof of the church. These are not small trees, by the way. These trees mysteriously survive with very small roots going through the interiors of the walls. When you enter the church, there's absolutely no sign of the trees on the roof. Architects have had conferences about this building and found it impossible for the roof to carry the weight of these trees, yet it has for hundreds of years. A couple of years ago, the creek flooded and covered the entire church, and the people expected the tiny church to finally give in and collapse. But although many other things were destroyed, St. Theodora's church remained. Ed, I've asked Ed to tell us a little bit about St. Theodora's life. Would you tell us a little bit, just a couple minutes?
Sure. Do I come up there? Or...
Yeah, sure. Come on up. Or rather, come on down!
So yeah, we don't know a lot about her, but at least what I was able to read, she, for reasons that we don't know, she joined a monastery as a man. She sort of dressed as a man and would, just presented herself as a man, but then and was helping a nearby village during a time of famine and was wrongly accused of raping another female who was pregnant, and again, obviously she didn't know she was a female, St. Theodora, so she was wrongly accused of this, and rather than sort of exonerate herself, which would have been very easily done given that she was a female, she was martyred. And the quote that she said upon her death was, "Let my body become a church, my blood a river, and my hair the trees." And then at the spot she was martyred was where this was built. And so, as Father said, you see the sort of miracle of these trees growing out of the roof, and it's amazing because you go in the inside, you expect to see a bunch of roots, and you're just like, where are they all? But then also there's this spring that gushes forth from the underside of the church, and you think it's a river. When I first got there, I thought it was a river, because it's not just a trickle. I mean, there's a big stream coming, but then you kind of look upstream and there's nothing. It's just all coming out from underneath the little chapel there. So it's just quite a sight to behold and a wonder. And to be there was just it was just a fascinating experience.
Thank you. We'll call Dr. Ed back here in a little bit to talk about another saint. I gave him assignments while we were on the bus. But yeah, I mean, the miracles and wonders that we saw, sitting here with pictures telling you about them just doesn't do it justice. So just use your imagination as best as possible, but it's really something to go visit. Day 4, we went to the holy island of Aegina. After a long bus ride through the hills and mountains of the Peloponnese region of Greece and a boat ride across the Saronic Gulf, we arrived in the north part of the island of Aegina, currently most famous for being the island that St. Nectarios moved to towards the end of his life to establish a women's monastery. Immediately after getting off the boat, we noticed a tiny chapel dedicated to St. Nicholas. St. Nicholas is the patron saint of sailors, so this chapel was placed here for their protection and so that they could give thanks to God and to the saint for protecting them once they arrived safely. After praying in this chapel, we took a bus to the monastery which St. Nectarios reinvigorated. The monastery had not been used in centuries, and so he and a few nuns built it almost from scratch. The monastery is actually named for the Holy Trinity, but that was what it was from earlier times before St. Nectarios arrived to Aegina. The monastery has 2 chapels which are connected to each other. When we arrived, a parochlasy service to St. Nectarios was taking place. And that was the service going on in the side chapel. Only women are allowed in the other chapel, by the way. And of course they allow clergy in there. Inside the chapel was a relic box with his skull, which we were blessed to venerate. So that's a skull of St. Nectarios right there. From my last trip to Greece, I have a piece of cotton that was wiped on the skull and given to me by the priest who was there. Unfortunately, I didn't see that same priest this year. He was very old last time, so I'm not sure if he's still with us. We then went to another room to venerate his grave, where he was originally buried. Sometimes when you put your ear against the tomb, you can hear St. Nectarios knocking with his archpastoral staff. And some of our pilgrims got to actually hear the knock. So this is the chapel that the tomb was in. We then toured the residence where St. Nectarios lived, including entering his cell, which is his bedroom. And you can see on the right all of the icons he had hanging on his wall. We even got to see the actual bed that he slept on. Here are some of St. Nectarios' old things. There's almost like a little museum in there for him. Like most places in Greece, everything was very well kept, and there were flowers everywhere, even in the medians of the highways. The monasteries especially kept their grounds immaculate. And maybe you can ask some of our, by the way, this is the table here of people who went to Greece, the Lindsay and Nihas families. And just the flowers, every once in a while when we're driving here in the States, there is like a small stretch of highway with some flowers or something. There was like the entire country was adorned in flowers all over it. It's unbelievable. Right next to the monastery is a newer church that was dedicated to St. Nectarios after his canonization as a saint. One of the interesting things in the architecture of this particular church, which I've never seen before, and I've asked some church architects and they've never seen this before either. Notice up here, this is the pulpit where the deacon goes to read the gospel. It's right above the beautiful gate, the royal doors. So he climbs up there and reads the gospel from there. I think that's pretty neat. Inside the church, the very large church, was a smaller chapel where the remainder of St. Nectarios' relics lay. The chapel is a very peaceful place where pilgrims from all over come to ask the intercessions of this wonder-working saint, who was especially the patron saint of those with cancer and pancreatic problems. After the pilgrimage to St. Nectarios, we enjoyed a seafood lunch with fresh seafood caught right from the sea while sitting on the beach. Wasn't too shabby. My daughters collected seashells, which they forgot there and were devastated. Yeah, that's me swimming in my cassock. I wouldn't even walk on the sand with my shoes. I hate the sand. Day 5, the journey to Kalambaka. The next day took us from Nafplio to Kalambaka. We were supposed to visit the ancient site of Delphi, which I think Ed is still a little upset with me we didn't go there. But it was all outdoors on a very hot day, and many of us were quite run down, even a bit sick. So instead we visited a couple of monasteries on the way, which did not disappoint. The first monastery we went to was that of Saint Ephraim of Nea Makri. The body of this martyred monastic was found after the abbess of the monastery, now Saint Macaria, was given a vision of where to find his incorrupt body over 500 years after his martyrdom. He had been long forgotten, but because of the abbess's holiness, his life was revealed to her. And I'm going to have Dr. Ed come back and tell us a little bit about Saint Ephraim of Nea Makri.
All right, I'll just refer to him as Saint Ephraim, since I probably have trouble saying that location. But as Father said, he was discovered some 500 years after his life by a nun who she had a hold on a second. She had a little hermitage there, and there was she heard a voice. She knew that this was the site of a former monastery that had been pillaged during the time of the Ottomans. And knowing that, she sort of knew it was a holy place, and she heard a voice telling her to sort of dig here and you'll find what you're looking for. So with the help of some others, they dug there and found the remains of Saint Ephraim. And then it was revealed to her upon finding his skull and his remains what had happened to him. He was there at the site of the monastery, and then in the 1300s, the Ottomans came and just pillaged and killed everyone in the monastery. He was able to actually escape that first invasion because he was off a little ways, and then came back and found that that everyone had been killed. But so then he lived there as just a hermit for another year. But then they actually found him and then tortured him for 8 months, somewhat mercilessly. And then he died. So all that was revealed in visions to this nun. And then following her, finding his bones and his remains, then there were many miraculous things that happened. Following that, many healings. He would appear to people with kidney disease, heart disease, mental illness. Sometimes people in the hospital that were on their deathbed and would have apparitions of him, and he would, basically say that they would be healed. And then they would recount those stories, and they have it kept in a volume of all the miraculous healings. So this was in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It might continue to now even. I'm not sure if he still is involved in miraculous healings, but it was numerous healings. So that's Saint Ephraim.
Thank you. So the martyr was hung upside down from a tree, tortured and burned. The tree that he was hung from now has a building around it at the monastery. So this is the tree that you see in the icon where he was hung. And so they have this whole building. It was actually closed, but I was able to take this picture. You can see me right there in the window. And I think that's Juliana trying to look in. But we were able to catch a picture of that, so it was kind of cool to see. His holy relics lie completely on display inside the monastery church. So you go in and you actually see him, and you see his skull just like that. And I think it was Jennifer Lindsay who came out and said, I wasn't quite prepared for that. But yes, his relics are completely on display there. We then proceeded to another ancient monastery in Stagmata, very high up on a mountaintop, where only 3 monks live. but there were many blessings for us to discover there. The monastery is dedicated to the Feast of the Transfiguration. The monastery was closed when we got there, but our tour guide, Stephanos, called and asked the abbot if he would let us in. So the abbot himself served us drinks and snacks while another higher monk showed us around. We also ate the most delicious cherries right off a tree. The chapel was very ancient, from the Byzantine Empire, the 12th century. The monastery was founded by Saint Clemes, or Clement, and funded by the Byzantine Emperor Alexios Komnenos in 1106. The mosaics on the floor were the originals. Again, these places, the pictures never do them justice. We venerated two very special relics, the skull of the founder of the monastery, St. Clement, and a piece of the cross of our Lord. So the piece of the cross was right in this piece over here. So this monastery was just like a hidden gem. And we weren't even supposed to go there, but just by God's providence we ended up there. But the blessings didn't stop there. In their second chapel, they had the wonder-working relics of St. Luke, the blessed surgeon, who was a bishop and surgeon during communist Russia. This chapel not only contained the relics of the saint, but some of his vestments, surgical instruments, and drawings he made. He was a doctor and artist, just like his patron saint, Luke the Evangelist. They also had a display of photographs and writings of the saint.
What year was that?
That was in the 20th century, so in the 1900s sometime. The hotel in Kalambaka had icons on the hallways, in the hallways, as well as did many restaurants and shops, as well as even gas stations and other places in Greece. So living in an Orthodox country is a completely different experience. So this was our hotel in Kalambaka, and this is one of the restaurants in Thessaloniki, where we went to twice. So it's not just like a little dinky icon in the corner. These are huge icons. After spending the night in Kalambaka, where we would see the great wonder of the Meteora monasteries from our hotel rooms, we journeyed to two of the monasteries, St. Stephen the Protomartyr and St. Nicholas the Wonder Worker. While there used to be 24 monasteries on Meteora, there are only 6 that remain. The Meteora monasteries rank second in importance in all of Greece, in all of Greek monasteries, after the monasteries of Mount Athos. St. Stephanos, or Stephen the Protomartyr, is a community of nuns in the most accessible of the monasteries. Instead of climbing many stairs, there is a bridge that can be taken to this holy site. The monastery had its beginnings in the 12th century. The monasteries on Meteora generally charge tourists a fee to get in, especially since there are so many people that are always there. But because there was a priest leading the group, they did not charge us anything. The larger and newer church that they had was dedicated to the memory of the hieromartyr Charalambos. Can you imagine walking in and this is the ceiling, let alone all the walls and the iconostasis and everything? I mean, I just didn't have the time to take all the pictures and show them all to you. We'd be here for as long as our trip was. The iconography in this church was done by the same iconographer who redid the Church of the Resurrection in Jerusalem. And he's also the same iconographer, get this, who painted our Basilica of St. Mary in Livonia, Michigan. His name is Vlasios Tsotsonis. When I saw the iconography on the wall, I said to the nun, this looks familiar, who painted this? And she told me Vlasios Tsotsonis. I said, I know him. So it's kind of neat. In this church, we received the blessing of venerating the wonder-working skull of St. Charalambos. St. Charalambos is known for curing people with illnesses, especially strange illnesses. Because our group was led by a priest, the nun who was giving us a private tour took us to the ancient and smaller chapel of St. Stephen. Here we venerated several relics. The most notable was one of the stones that was used to martyr the proto-martyr and deacon Stephen, found in Acts 7. So this is the stone that was one of the stones used to kill St. Stephen with. I also anointed everyone in our group with holy oil from these saints' relics. Here's a closer look at the stone. Here are some views of the chapel. And there's also a small museum and 2 gift shops at this monastery. The second monastery we visited was that of St. Nicholas. We had to climb around 200 steps to get there. Only 3 monks live in this monastery today. The iconography was very impressive. It was done by the iconographer who introduced the Macedonian style of iconography. They are currently working on cleaning this icon, so you actually can see they drew in chalk over here small areas that they prepared to clean the icons, and they're going to clean the entire work there. And a group photo at the top of St. Nicholas Monastery. Again, just to show you these pictures doesn't do it justice. I had a very interesting conversation with Brad, actually, who has a secret love of geology, and we were talking about at some point these very tall rocks, which are very high, I couldn't even take a guess, off the ground. This was all underwater, under the sea at one point in history, probably millions of years ago. And they've even found like seashells up there. So, but you know, there are a lot of volcanoes in the seas over there, but there are also a lot of earthquake lines. So, just amazing what it's done. On our drive to our new location of Thessaloniki, we stopped at the picturesque village of Metsovo for lunch. This was probably the best meal that we had. Metsovo is known for its meats, cheeses, and wines. And again, the beauty in this place was unbelievable. We made our way to our final city of Thessaloniki. Thessaloniki is a very ancient city. They have been trying to work on putting a new subway system for years, but keep coming across ancient ruins underground and have to stop their work. St. Paul wrote a letter to the Thessalonians and visited there as well. Thessaloniki had a very large population of Jews in the 1st century when Paul would have visited. Thessaloniki is also a very important center for Orthodoxy and has some of the most ancient and important churches. On Sunday morning, we attended St. Anthony the Great Chapel, which was built in the year 1800 and is attached to a monastery, although it functions as a parish today. The priest, a native of Chicago, Illinois, and he's the professor of teleturgics in Thessaloniki, asked me to preside over the liturgy and to preach the homily. I preached in English, though, and although I liturgized mostly in Greek, which was really neat to do. After liturgy, we grabbed some fast Greek food and began touring some remarkable churches around the city. We began with the most famous of all, St. Demetrios Cathedral. St. Demetrios is the patron saint of Thessaloniki. He was martyred in the bathhouse underneath the church. The church was built over the place of his martyrdom later. We saw his holy relics, which still stream myrrh once a year, and they have a beautiful fragrance and perform miracles till today. So a little surprise for you, instead of doing small compline today, we're going to do the akathist to St. Demetrios, and I'm going to anoint all of you who can stay with the myrrh from St. Demetrios' body. And it pours out every year, and wait till you smell it. It's amazing. This church is very large. The altar is huge, probably because of the number of clergy who serve there on special occasions. There are relics of a number of saints throughout the building. So here are the relics. Yes? Check.
You said it's once a year that the myrrh comes out?
Yes.
Is there a special day there? Or?
I don't think, so they just said once a year, his relics just kind of pour more myrrh. So these are his relics. This is how they're kept. His head is on top and the rest of his body underneath. And we all got to venerate those. So some of the ancient iconography that still remains from over 1,000 years ago. You have the top one is a mosaic, and this is a painting. Painting's over here. This is the bathhouse underneath the church, which you can go visit and see the exact place where he was martyred. So another wonder. I mean, we have nothing like this in this country. It just, this blows our mind. This is the other cathedral in Thessaloniki. It's the Cathedral of St. Gregory Palamas. The relics of this holy saint are found in a side room of the church, in its own chapel. After visiting several churches and monasteries in the area, we went to a very special monastery where St. Paisios is buried. Hundreds of pilgrims stood in the rain and waited their turn to venerate the holy saint's grave. Day 8, Mount Olympus. Mount Olympus was the place of the ancient Greek false gods, but since then it has been conquered through Christ's resurrection, and ancient temples have been converted to holy Orthodox churches. We visited two very important monasteries on this day. First, the monastery of St. Dionysios. This is not St. Dionysios the Areopagite. This is St. Dionysius of Mount Olympus. It's a different one. So Father Jacques was delayed in getting to us because the patriarch requested his help in Lebanon, but on Sunday evening he finally made it to join us. We had a private meeting with the abbot of the monastery of St. Dionysius. His name is Elder Maximus, who is a great spiritual father and theologian. He is the author of many spiritual books in the Greek language. He spoke to us about monasticism and the spiritual life. We were able to just have a dialogue with him and ask him questions. Of course, Father Jacques would translate for us to Greek. This monastery, by the way, is responsible for the Orthodox mission in Tanzania, in Africa, as they provided a bishop from among their monastics, and they sent 2 monks there every year to help with the ministry. The second monastery we went to was probably one of the greatest highlights of our trip, for me anyway. The monastery of St. Ephrem the Syrian was the closest thing I've ever seen to paradise on earth. The attention to every detail made it a very special place, cared for with great love. And the pictures, trust me, do not do it justice. Here we also had a private meeting with Hierondisa, which means abbess, Katarina. She was the spiritual daughter of Saint Porphyrios. Before becoming a nun, she was a judge in Athens. She too was a prolific author and a great theologian. She told us the history of the 40-year-old monastery, which she began herself through her obedience to Saint Porphyrios. It's really cool. Saint Porphyrios, who wasn't in the area, he was in Athens, told her where to go and what to do. He told her to go to this place and to start digging, and in a very shallow place they found water underground, and she knew that that was the place to build the monastery. So she told us many stories about St. Porphyrios' miraculous life, and there are so many stories I couldn't share them now, but they're amazing. She took questions from us and discussed beauty within the Orthodox world, as well as many other important spiritual matters. And you know, the way she spoke about the necessity of beauty in the church and on our grounds was really moving. I wish everybody could have heard that. I wish I could have recorded it, actually. It was, there's a need for beauty in our worship, in our buildings, and you saw that in the monastery, and you see that in most monasteries. The chapels were as breathtaking as the rest of the monastery. There were 3 chapels, all built into one building. The main one was dedicated to St. Ephrem the Syrian. The second one was dedicated to Hierondisa, the abbess's own patron saint, Catherine of Sinai. So this icon is on the back wall of St. Catherine's falling asleep. This was the altar, and this was the iconostas. It's kind of a different style. It's lower. This is actually more traditional, with just a few icons coming up from it. The nuns do all of their own embroidery. This right here is the entire text of the Nicene Creed, and it was very large. I mean, it was like taller than I am. And these actually were for sale. I was very tempted to bring them back, but I mean, they had the most beautiful stuff there. A couple more scenes from around the monastery. Early in the morning, on day 9, we set out to the beautiful village of Oronopoli, which means City of Heaven. It is the port town where you can take a boat to Mount Athos. Although Mount Athos is a peninsula, it can only be accessed by boat. Oronopoulos is filled with tiny hotels for pilgrims, restaurants, and Orthodox shops. One could walk around there for days. And releasing me in a town like that is like a kid in a candy shop, so it's a little dangerous. But unfortunately, we didn't have a lot of time for shopping that day, so we had to cut that part short. We set off on a boat tour around Mount Athos, where we could see several of the large monasteries, which are like little Orthodox cities. So there are, I can't remember the number of monasteries, over 20 monasteries, like big monasteries, not to mention there are a lot of smaller skeets and hermitages and things like that. But each monastery, like this is one monastery here, and there's probably like more that you can't see, but it's like a little city. So these are probably the cells that the monks live in. And usually the church, which right here, the main church, is right in the middle. So that's like the center of their lives. And then they have different chapels in different parts of the monastery. It was windy on the boat. Here is the summit of Mount Athos. There are a lot of these mini chapels, by the way, all around Greece. There are even smaller ones that are the size of a large mailbox where you can light a vigil candle. I really was tempted to bring one of these home with me. I think the shipping would be a little expensive. But they actually have places on the highway as you're driving that we saw that makes these. They're like little tiny churches. And inside you see there's like there are icons inside. So you go in just to do like your private prayers or something. It's the coolest thing.
Is there just room for one person in the farm?
A couple people could go in there. Yeah, probably a small family. After the boat tour around Mount Athos, we stopped at another peninsula known for their beaches where we swam. Of course, I didn't swim. Got something to eat or just relaxed on the seashore and on Alkis Beach. And you'll be happy to know that my daughters found more seashells and they brought them home this time. And this was travel day. Half of the group went back home and the other half stayed in Greece for a couple more days. I went to the beautiful city of Volos with Father Jacques and his mother and her friend, which had one of the most breathtaking views. On the way to Volos, we stopped at a little village near Larissa to see a special chapel dedicated to Saint Paraskevi, the patron saint of those who are blind or have illnesses with their eyes. The chapel was hidden in a valley, and it had attached with it a fresh water source. To get to this water, you had to crouch down very low and walk into the cave. At the end, there was water pouring out of the rock. People with eye problems would wash their eyes with that water, and when they were healed, would leave a gift. As you can see, many prayer ropes were left there. See that? So here, it looks like it's kind of tall. I was bent all the way over, and I had to get even lower because my back was touching the ceiling there. We continued to Volos and stayed at a beautiful hotel on top of the mountain overlooking the city. Again, these pictures, man, they're just not doing them justice. We had dinner at this beautiful outdoor restaurant with a view of the sea and the city of Volos. And that wraps up our 2023 pilgrimage to Greece. Who wishes they were there? Any questions?
With the Mount Athos, there was multiple monasteries, but
Mhm.
in anything I've ever seen, like on the History Channel or whatever, it's just like one monastery that only the men could enter, but where was that part of it?
So when you see a documentary on it, they're usually just going to a very specific monastery, and they only have a permission to spend time in like one or two places. So that's not actually a good representation of Mount Athos. Subdeacon David spent a lot of time on Mount Athos, more than I have. He could probably answer the questions better. This time we couldn't actually go on Mount Athos. We didn't have the time to, and I'm really regretting that. But each monastery, like the big monasteries, are almost like cities, like little kind of towns from. It's almost like you walk into the Byzantine Empire in the 10th century or something. And there are lots of buildings. There are lots of churches. You have the big church, the cathedra they call it. You have, or the catholicos, I'm sorry. Then you have smaller chapels all over. You have hidden chapels in caves and different things. But yeah, it's not like that in most of the documentaries that you see.
But women are allowed to go in?
No, women are not allowed to go in. That's why we did the boat tour, and women could just see from the outside.
So there's a bridge, that's all of it, they got something up there.
That's Meteora. That's a different place. Meteora, yeah. How they built those places is absolutely amazing to me. I mean, without God's help, it's probably impossible.
How'd they get food and stuff? Because those buildings were clear at the very top.
So now they have elevators that are just like for food and supplies. I don't know that people can ride on those. Yeah. Father?
So how do you arrange this trip?
So usually with connections. There are tour agencies and people here in the States who organize these kind of tours. Actually, just from the ones I know of, we're one of 4 groups from this archdiocese that took tours of Greece this year. I had connections with Father Jacques Khalil, who's the Dean of the Bellarmine. He's one of the Patriarch's right-hand men. But he's also, he studied in Thessaloniki, got his PhD there, so he knows like everybody there, speaks fluent Greek. So he was able to open up a lot of things to us that was really cool. But yeah, I mean, there are tour groups here in the States that take people there.
Is what you did, that you have went through a group here for the...
No, we kind of put it together, and I have to say it was a little disorganized. I was getting nervous towards the end because of how busy I am and how busy Father Jacques was. We were throwing things together, so I'm really thankful for the patience of the people who went. My mom who went on the group, and my aunt kept calling me up saying, when are we going to find out about this? When are we doing that? I said, don't worry, it'll all get taken care of. But there were a lot of surprises, even things, like I said, we were supposed to go to Delphi, this ancient architectural site. We ended up not going there, but went to 2 other monasteries that were probably more of a blessing. So things just kind of work out, and you have to be flexible sometimes on these trips. Not everything could go exactly to plan. There's a lot of variables. Yes, Jackie?
Where St. Paul preached from, you named it, but is that anything related to Mars Hill? Is it,
Which one?
where
So
St. Paul preached from in Athens?
yeah. So that's that hill he was preaching from.
That was Mars Hill.
Yeah. He preached several places in Greece. So he was in Thessaloniki. Father Jacques was pointing out as we were driving some of the places. There were kind of obscure places outside of the city, because oftentimes they throw him out of the city. So he'd go anywhere they'd listen. Yes, Brian?
Did you see anything, any relics or anything for St. Joseph the Hesychast?
No, those are on Mount Athos mostly, but actually we have a monastery in New York, which I would like to plan a pilgrimage there for our men's group, and we'll have the women's group go to a different monastery this year. But yeah, they have St. Joseph the Hesychast in St. Nectarius Monastery in New York. So yeah, he was the spiritual father of Elder Ephraim, who died a few years ago. Yes, Dave?
Speaking of skulls, why do they separate the skulls from the heart?
Usually it's so that you can put the skull in one place and the body in the other. They actually usually remove the saint's entire right arm, and when you get relics in your churches, you usually get a piece, like a little tiny piece of that right arm. So for example, St. Raphael, since he founded this church, we have a large portion of probably his hand, if I had to guess, somewhere from his hand. I also have another surprise for everybody, which is really, really cool. We are being gifted from Holy Cross Monastery in Wayne County about 18 relics, which I'll speak to some people, and I'm going to need some donations to make the boxes to hold those relics. But some of the relics that we're going to get are very notable saints. So think about it. Pieces of bone from saints like St. Basil the Great, St. Andrew the Apostle, St. Mark the Evangelist. Ready for this one? St. George the Great Martyr. So eventually, hopefully in the near future, we are going to have those on display for people to venerate here at our church. I've been working for a few years now on getting us relics, and so finally, while I was in Greece actually, Hierodeacon Serge from the monastery let me know that he's been able to secure those for us. We're also going to get St. Tikhon, Patriarch of Moscow, St. Alexis of Wilkes-Barre, and some others, so very excited about that. St. Nicholas of Myra, also another saint who we're getting. So, I mean, these are huge. Nothing set in stone yet, but I'm thinking about doing a pilgrimage to the Holy Land, Jerusalem, next year. Anyone think they might be interested in that? Yes? Okay. Well, I hope so. This year for Greece trip, we had about 60 people who were interested at first. We only ended up with about 15 people there. I think I was related to half of them. So, you know, it's hard once we get to the point of planning. When people back out, that makes it difficult. Someone was going around telling people that the trip was canceled for some reason. So I think some people didn't sign up. But that was unfortunate. It was really unfortunate that more people weren't there to experience these things. But I understand these trips are expensive. They're hard to plan, to take off of work and all that. But God willing, we'll keep doing trips like this. So thank you.